Okay, picture this. Your alarm goes off, and before your eyes are even fully open, before you've said a single word, before you've taken one conscious breath, your hand is already moving. It slides across the nightstand, finds your phone like it's been doing this forever, which, honestly, it has, and boom, you're in it. Instagram, emails, Twitter, the news, maybe a text from someone that mildly stresses you out, maybe a notification from a game you don't even remember downloading. And you just scroll for 7 minutes, maybe 12. Maybe you looked up and 23 minutes had passed and you genuinely cannot account for any of it. And here's the thing. You didn't even decide to do that. It just happened. Like gravity. Then you drag yourself out of bed. You're already slightly behind, slightly annoyed, slightly anxious about nothing specific and everything at once. You skip breakfast or you inhale something that doesn't count as food. You rush. And by the time you sit down to actually do something important, work, studying, whatever it is, there's this weird fog. This low-grade mental static. And you spend the next 7 hours reacting to everything around you instead of actually directing your own life. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's not a coincidence. And it's not because you're lazy or undisciplined, or because you just haven't found the right morning routine yet. The reason your days feel like they're running you instead of the other way around has almost everything to do with what happens in those first few minutes after you wake up. And most people have absolutely no idea. So, let's fix that. For real this time. But first, I need to kill a few myths, because they're probably the reason you've already tried to fix this and failed. Myth number 1, you just need more motivation. Look, motivation is one of the most overrated concepts in the self-improvement world. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are inconsistent by design. Waiting to feel motivated to build a better morning is like waiting to feel like going to the dentist. It's not gonna happen. Motivation follows action. It doesn't precede it. The people with great mornings don't have more motivation than you. They've structured their environment so that good behavior requires the least amount of decision-making possible. Myth number 2, you need to wake up at 5 a.m. I'm genuinely a little exhausted by this one. The idea that productive people wake up at 5 a.m. has become so ingrained in self-improvement culture that people actually feel guilty for sleeping until 7. But research published in Nature Communications, which looked at over 400,000 people, found that your chronotype, whether you're naturally a morning person or an evening person, is significantly determined by genetics. Forcing yourself to wake up 2 hours earlier than your body wants to is not discipline. It's sleep deprivation wearing a productivity costume. And sleep-deprived brains have measurably worse focus, worse decision-making, and worse emotional regulation. You're not building a better morning. You're just suffering earlier. Myth number 3. It's about willpower. No. Willpower is a finite resource. There's a concept called decision fatigue. The more choices you make throughout the day, the worse your subsequent choices get. If your morning is a gauntlet of micro-decisions, what to eat, what to wear, what to do first, whether to check your phone, you are burning through your cognitive fuel before you even start the work that actually matters to you. The solution isn't to develop more willpower, it's to make willpower irrelevant. Okay? So if it's not motivation, not 5 a.m. alarms, and not willpower, what is it actually about? It's about state. Specifically, the neurological state your brain is in during those first 7 minutes of the day. And this is where it gets genuinely interesting. When you're asleep, your brain operates mostly in delta and theta wave states. Very slow, very deep. When you wake up, there's a transition period, usually somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes, where your brain is shifting from that deep sleep state into full waking consciousness. Neuroscientists sometimes call this hypnopompia. And during this window, your brain is in a uniquely malleable, suggestible, almost semi-conscious state. Your critical thinking isn't fully online yet. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thought, long-term planning, and emotional regulation, is still kind of booting up. Think of it like a computer restart. For the first few minutes, the system is loading. Programs are initializing. It's vulnerable to whatever runs first. Now here's the thing that should genuinely concern you. What most people run first is a fire hose of cortisol-spiking content. Stressful news, social comparison, email anxiety, algorithmic content designed by some of the smartest engineers on the planet specifically to hijack your attention and make you feel like you're missing something. You are handing your most neurologically impressionable moment of the day to an app whose entire business model depends on making you feel inadequate. A study from the University of British Columbia found that people who checked their email less frequently during the day reported significantly lower stress levels. And that's just email. We're talking about full social media exposure before you've even stood up. The emotional residue from what you consume in those first minutes literally colors the neurochemistry of the hours that follow. You don't notice it consciously, but it's there. That low-grade anxiety, that scattered feeling, that sense that you're already behind? A significant chunk of that is the hangover from your phone. And this connects to something called Cortisol Awakening Response, or CAR. Every morning, your cortisol levels naturally spike within the first 30 minutes of waking. This is actually healthy. Cortisol is what gives you alertness, energy, the drive to engage with the world. But cortisol is also your stress hormone. And if the first thing that Spike encounters is a bunch of stressful information and social comparison, your nervous system doesn't really distinguish between, I'm reading about a political crisis on Twitter, and there is an actual threat in front of me. It just floods the system, and you spend the rest of the morning trying to regulate that flood instead of channeling it productively. So here's the reframe, and I want you to sit with this. Your morning routine isn't about productivity, it's about priming. You are literally setting the chemical and neurological baseline for your entire day in those first few minutes. And right now, for most people, that baseline is anxious, reactive, and scattered. The goal isn't to become some Zen monk who rises at dawn and meditates for 45 minutes before drinking celery juice. The goal is just to stop poisoning the well first thing in the morning. Now let's talk about what actually works. And I mean actually, Not Instagram influencer said it works while holding a green smoothie on a beach works. Mechanistically, neurologically, practically works. The single highest leverage change you can make, the one thing that, if you do nothing else from this video, will have the most impact, is a phone-free first 30 minutes. Not 7, 30. I know that sounds impossible to some of you. But hear me out. Those first 30 minutes are the only time in your entire day when your brain is genuinely in a state of natural transition, when it's not being directed by external demands yet, when you have, if you choose to use it, a kind of cognitive freshness that you will never get back once the day starts pulling at you. Every notification, every social media post, every email you read in those first 30 minutes is essentially stealing that freshness and replacing it with someone else's agenda. Andrew Huberman, the Stanford neuroscientist, has talked extensively about the role of morning light exposure in setting your circadian clock and your cortisol curve for the day. Getting outside or near a window within the first 10 to 30 minutes of waking, even on a cloudy day, signals to your brain that the day has genuinely started. It accelerates the shift out of that groggy transitional state. It's one of the lowest effort, highest impact things you can do, and it costs you nothing. But here's where most morning routine advice stops, and where things start to get actually interesting. Your brain in the morning is in a state that's highly receptive to setting what psychologists call implementation intentions. These are not goals, they're not vague aspirations, they're specific if-then plans. Research by Peter Gollwitzer at NYU found that people who form implementation intentions, meaning they decide in advance exactly when, where, and how they will do a behavior, are 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through than people who just set goals. 2 to 3 times. That's not a small effect. What this means practically is that your morning is the ideal time to briefly, deliberately decide what matters today. Not in a journaling for 40 minutes way. In a 2-minute, brutally honest 1 to 3 things way. What are the 1 to 3 things that, if I do them today, will make today genuinely matter? Not the full to-do list, not the email inbox, the things that are actually important versus just urgent. Most people spend their entire day on urgent things. Urgent is someone else's priority dressed up as your emergency. Important is what moves your actual life forward. And the tragedy is that important things almost never feel urgent. They're quiet, they wait. And if you don't deliberately protect time for them in the morning before the day's noise takes over, they just don't happen. Day after day, week after week. This is how years pass, and people look up and feel like they haven't really moved. Now let's talk about something that almost nobody discusses in morning routine content, the transition. Specifically, the transition from sleep to engagement, and how almost everyone botches it. When you wake up feeling groggy, and everybody does sometimes, the instinct is to either push through immediately, or to lie there scrolling as a kind of semi-rest. Both are suboptimal. The grogginess you feel is largely adenosine, a sleep pressure chemical that has been building during the early part of your sleep and is still clearing from your system. The fastest natural ways to accelerate that clearance are movement, light, and water. Not coffee. Not yet. Here's something most people don't know. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, not by clearing adenosine itself. If you drink coffee the moment you wake up, you're essentially blocking the receptor while adenosine is still building. And then, when the caffeine wears off, there's more adenosine waiting than there would have been otherwise. That's why the afternoon crash hits harder when you caffeinate immediately. Research and circadian biology experts, including Dr. Matthew Walker, suggest waiting 60 to 90 minutes after waking before having caffeine. It sounds annoying. It works. The movement piece doesn't have to be a workout. Even 5 minutes of walking, light stretching, or just standing and moving around the house is enough to start signaling to your body that the day is active. Your heart rate increases slightly, blood flow to your brain increases, and that shift in physical state creates a corresponding shift in mental state. This is why a short walk in the morning often makes you feel more awake than a second cup of coffee. Drink water. Your brain is roughly 75% water. You've been fasting and without fluids for 7 or 8 hours. Even mild dehydration, 1 to 2%, measurably impairs cognitive function and mood. Drink a glass of water before you drink anything else. It's so simple it feels like it can't matter. It does. Okay? Let's get practical. Really practical. Because advice without a plan is just entertainment. Here's a bare minimum morning protocol that actually works without requiring you to become a different person. This is for real humans with jobs and kids and unpredictable lives. Total additional time required, about 15 minutes. The night before, and this is actually morning routine advice, because your morning starts the night before. Put your phone across the room. Not on airplane mode on your nightstand. Across the room. Or outside the bedroom. Because the problem isn't just the phone in the morning, it's the phone at night. Sleep quality is significantly impacted by blue light exposure and mental stimulation from screens in the hour before bed. If your sleep is worse, your morning is harder. The whole system degrades. So separate yourself from it physically. Use an actual alarm clock if you need an alarm. When you wake up, before you do anything else, get to natural light within 10 minutes. Open the curtains and stand there for 2 minutes. Step outside for 60 seconds. That's it. You're not meditating. You're not exercising. You're just telling your brain it's morning. Drink a glass of water. Don't overthink it. Do something physical for 5 to 10 minutes. Walk, stretch, a few push-ups, dance in your kitchen. It doesn't matter. Move your body enough that your heart rate goes up slightly and you feel like a person who is awake. Then, and only then, sit down for 2 minutes and decide your 1 to 3 important things for the day. Not from your phone. Write them on paper if you can. The act of physically writing reinforces commitment in a way that typing doesn't. This is your anchor for the day. Now you can have coffee. That's it. That's the protocol. Light, water, movement, intention. 15 minutes. No green juice, no ice bath, no waking up before the sun. Just removing the worst habits and replacing them with the minimum effective dose of better ones. Here's where I want to get a little real with you, because I think there's something important missing from most morning routine content. And it's this. The reason most people struggle with their mornings isn't that they don't know what to do. You probably already knew that phones are bad in the morning. You've heard the sleep hygiene advice. You know you should drink water. The problem is the gap between knowing and doing. And that gap exists because of how habits actually form. Habits don't form through motivation or through deciding to do something. They form through repetition in consistent context. There's a loop. Cue, routine, reward. And if the cue for your morning is phone is on nightstand making sounds, the routine will always be grab phone. You cannot willpower your way out of a strong cue routine loop. You have to change the cue. This is why putting the phone in a different room isn't optional to this protocol. It's the structural foundation of it. You are engineering your environment so that the bad habit requires effort, and the good habit is the path of least resistance. B.J. Fogg at Stanford, who wrote Tiny Habits, has this insight that behavior change is easier when you design for it rather than trying to overcome yourself. Motivation fluctuates. Environment is constant. Shape the environment, and the behavior follows almost automatically. So if you take one meta lesson from this whole video, let it be this. Stop trying to change yourself through force of will. Start changing your environment through design. The person who removes all the junk food from their house doesn't need more discipline at midnight. They need to make fewer decisions. The person who puts running shoes by their bed doesn't need more motivation. They've made the first step of the habit automatic. Apply that same thinking to your morning. Make the phone inaccessible. Have the glass of water already sitting on your nightstand. Have the curtains on a track that opens easily. Reduce friction on the good behaviors. Increase friction on the bad ones. Let the environment do the work. Look, I want to close with something honest, because there's a version of this video that ends with a hype montage and dramatic music, and your life will never be the same if you just implement these steps. And I'm not going to do that, because that's what gets views but doesn't change lives. Here's the actual truth. The first morning you try this, it will feel weird. You might lie in bed without your phone and feel genuinely uncomfortable. Your brain will tell you this is boring, this is unnecessary, just check the notifications. Nothing will happen if you just peek. That discomfort is not a sign that it's not working. That discomfort is the withdrawal. It means you're breaking a pattern. The second morning will be slightly less uncomfortable. The fifth morning, you'll start to notice something, a kind of quiet at the beginning of the day that you probably haven't experienced since before smartphones existed. Not emptiness. Spaciousness. A sense that the day belongs to you, at least for these first few minutes, before you hand it over to the world. By the second week, something shifts. You start arriving at your work, your tasks, your important things with slightly more of yourself intact, slightly less reactive, slightly more like someone who is choosing their day rather than being dragged through it. And over months, that adds up to something that's genuinely hard to quantify, but very easy to feel. The difference between a life you're building and a life that's just happening to you. Your first 7 minutes are not just 7 minutes. They are the tone setter, the neurological primer, the cue that tells your brain and your body what kind of day this is going to be. Right now, for most people, that cue is anxious, reactive, behind, overwhelmed. It doesn't have to be. You don't need a new personality. You don't need to wake up at 5 a.m. You don't need to overhaul your entire life this week. You need to do a few small things differently in those first few minutes, consistently, until they become the new automatic. Start tonight. Put the phone somewhere inconvenient. Put a glass of water somewhere obvious. That's it. Just those two things. See what tomorrow morning feels like when you're not immediately handed someone else's agenda. Because the version of you that makes it to noon with focus intact, that moves the important things forward instead of just the urgent ones, that ends the day feeling like they actually directed something, that version of you is built one morning at a time. And it starts with the next one.